Absence of words will not produce silence, even though words can interrupt silence. Silence is not inactive or speechless. It's dynamic and the communication continues. It's dynamic, the communication continues. Psalm 19, 1 to 3.
The heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard.
Day to day pours forth speech. There is no speech, nor their words. Their voice is not heard. But how do we hear? Heavens are telling the glory of God. Here is a communication without word. In the reference given 19th chapter of 1st King, you read 11th verse.
So he said, "Go forth and stand on the mountain before the Lord." And behold, the Lord was passing by. And a great and strong wind was rending the mountains and breaking in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind.
Thin silence. What is that? Gentle whisper. Still small voice. Mriduswaram. Vera. Tamil. Melliya Sattam. Still small voice. There was a sheer silence. Job writes, it's a whisper, but it becomes a thunder. So, silence is not inactive but dynamic. Continuous communication happens. Our own non-verbal communication is 70%, verbal is only 30%. Learning to listen to the silence, which you have been doing. So continuous learning to silence. Listen to silence. One pastor writes, "The silence we desperately need today." I often hear about the benefits of silence in a world of sound. Taking away time from various things to sit in silence. But it can get confusing as to why, what is the point of silence. 3 types of silence. Many people associate silence with hearing nothing audibly and thinking nothing. But we cannot just think nothing. 3 main sounds we hear. We hear our own thoughts. Use silence to serve the Word of God. Hear the Word. It sounds ironic to have silence be mainly about the Word of God. But consider the following passage by Bonhoeffer. There is a view which misrepresents silence as a ceremonial gesture, as a mystical desire to get beyond the Word. This is to miss the essential relationship of silence to the Word. Silence is the simple stillness of the individual under the Word of God. We are silent before hearing the Word because our thoughts are already directed to the Word. As a child is quiet when he enters his father's room. We are silent after hearing the Word because the Word is still speaking and dwelling within us. We keep silence solely for the sake of the Word, and therefore not in order to show disregard for the Word, but rather to honor and receive it. The best silence is not about silence in itself. Silence serves the Word. Specifically, silence serves our heart's ability to receive the Word and ultimately enjoy the God who speaks the word. A calm and quiet soul. Prayers in the Psalms confirm this role for silence. In Psalm 62, "For God alone, O my soul, wait in silence, for my hope is from Him." David's silence is not vague nothingness. He seeks times of silence because he hopes in God. David connects his hope in God specifically to the Word of God. Once God has spoken, twice I have heard this, that power belongs to God. David connects this hope. So his hope in the God who has spoken leads him to seek silence. David waits on God because there is a word to hear. He waits in silence because he desires to listen to the speaker. His silence is word-focused. The theme of silence and hoping in God occurs throughout the Psalms. "I have calmed and quieted my soul, O Israel, hope in the Lord." Psalmist intertwines waiting and hoping in the word of the Lord. "I wait for the Lord, my soul waits, and in His word I hope." For the psalmist, silence and waiting gave hope because they focused on God and His word. He is not silent. This type of word-focused silence would benefit us immensely today. The greatest value in times of silence is not hearing our own thoughts or trying to think nothing, but letting silence prepare us for the Word of God by separating us from all noises which distract us, including our own mouths. Silence helps us to turn away from those noises and focus on God. Then once we hear God in His Word, silence creates space to chew on and hope in that Word. Purposeful silence is a chance for us to deliberately separate ourselves from our world of sound, phones, music, TV, so that we can more clearly hear from our God through His Word, enjoy Him through what we hear. Intentional silence is a chance for us to turn off the television, close our laptops, and put out our phones far away from us so that we can, like the psalmist, deliberately hear from and hope in our God and in His Word. Francis Schaeffer famously wrote, "God is there and He is not silent." In our bustling lives, we can't get enough reminders that this is wonderfully true. Our God exists and He speaks in His Word. So let's take time for silence in our loud days in order to truly hear Him who has spoken. I will remember my song in the night. I will meditate with my heart and my spirit ponders. I will meditate on your work and muse over your deeds. Okay. So, inward silence also. Learn to speak less. Listen more. Do you know what is around us? Little above, it's all silence. Little below the sea, it's all silence. Inside the earth, it is silence. Inside the body, except for the flow of blood, it's all silence. And also it is more space than matter. Matter is very little, space is more. In the atom itself, matter is very little, space is more. Actually, in one sense, we are very porous people, very little mass. So if it is more silence around, why do we hear only the noise? We have trained our ears to hear only the noise. We have not trained our ears to hear the silence. One bishop once came to meet Abba. Abba means patriarch, fathers, we call it, very mature people. And he wanted some counsel from this Abba. He waited from morning till afternoon together. Bishop was getting annoyed because Abba was not telling anything. So the servant of the Abba came and told Abba, Abba, Bishop is waiting to hear from you. He said, if he can't hear my silence, he cannot hear my words. All the while he was communicating, but he was not listening. It looks strange. How do you sometimes communicate in prayer for the other person? You intercede, God hears, and God does something in the life, changes the heart, and brings. There is no word, mystery, but God communicates. So, increase your inner space to listen to the silence. Let all unnecessary clutter, words let it go. There will be more space for us. One day of silence, he felt so spacious to receive. Trappist monastery, they keep silence for 1 year. They do all the work but are silent. In one of the monastery, one elderly priest, there are rabbits who are the senior counselors. This elderly priest was given, after his work, he has to go into the chapel, kneel down and pray for 1 hour. A novice, a new person came. For him it is, after your work, go and sit there and pray for 1 hour. Both at the same time. When this elderly priest saw this younger man, novice, sitting and praying, he has to kneel and pray. He developed an irritation toward him, aversion toward him, hatred toward him. Every day it was increasing. He said at one point, the hatred was tasting like dung in his mouth. So bad. So he went to the abbot and shared his problem. Do you know what the abbot said? Pray for 2 more hours on your knees. 1 year later, they had opportunity to talk to one another, these two. The younger one said, what an inspiration for you, elderly priest kneeling and praying. What an inspiration. And he was thinking to himself, what inspiration. I was all the time feeling hatred for you. Silence brings out a lot of things from within us. Because when you're not talking, you cannot defend yourself. Talking is actually self-defense, many times. Projecting ourselves, explaining ourselves, justifying ourselves, talking about our achievements, knowledge, exhibiting everything. Quakers also in their meetings, they don't talk much. Only when the Spirit leads, they will talk. Otherwise, it's all silent meeting. So, when you find space and time for silence, practice little moment of silence during the day, even in your workplace. Listen to God, what I need to do. As you mentioned, when you do not know what to say, be silent. When you meet together, sometimes there is a compulsion that you must keep the conversation going. Why can't you sit quiet? It feels like miserable. The person who is not accustomed to silence will feel disturbed.